Good afternoon to you. Mark Sudduth, HurricaneTrack.com here with your off-season edition now of the Hurricane Outlook and Discussion. You noticed I've changed the title card here. It does reflect the fact that we are in the off-season now that it is well into December. We don't have any hurricane threats, no tropical storm threats. Our man in the Philippines, Brent, he's still there. If you don't know what I'm talking about, go back and watch a couple of the updates from the last week or so, and almost 2 weeks now, and you'll know what I'm talking about. Brent is still there. No, he's not stuck. He has been doing some documentation and some research and planning for future events out there. He will return to JFK Airport and then finally back home to the U.S. Virgin Islands later this weekend and next weekend. In fact, I'm going to go meet him up in New Jersey and New York this Friday and Saturday to go over everything that he did, get his data, get the video, and interview him, etc., for our upcoming series that will start coming out in January. So here we are in the off-season, and so the off-season outlook and discussion basically goes over parameters that we will keep an eye on for next year, for next hurricane season. That'll be the first part of this. We'll take a quick look at anything going on globally. It's not like the entire planet shuts down after November 30th. And in fact, the typhoon that just went through here in the Philippines is a good example of that. And then we have a cyclone here in the Indian Ocean, a pair of them, and the Southern Hemisphere cyclone season kicks into high gear. So there'll be something to talk about in the tropics every week, but usually we don't have anything in the Atlantic Basin or the southeastern Pacific here between December and June, although May has been more of a busy time in the last several years. But anyhow, you get the idea that this will be mostly a quick look at the puzzle pieces that we will be examining for next year, and then we will delve into lower 48 weather, keeping an eye on any potential storms, winter storms, that kind of thing, and go from there. All right, so in the Indian Ocean, we have an invest area, 92B, and then we have this system here. What would you call that? Belna or something like that? Belna. It's a cyclone right off the coast here of Africa, but on the east side, and as you can see, it's headed southwest towards Madagascar. Kind of an unusual track, maybe. We're not used to that. Luckily, not very intense, but it would bring some rainfall and other related impacts to that region. This invest area off the Horn of Africa, what will it be doing? Well, according to the various computer models, not much yet. It's just an area of interest, and we will keep an eye on that. The Indian Ocean up here has been very warm relative to average, and it's starting to cool off a little bit. The anomalies, we call that a very strong Indian Ocean dipole. Part of that, we'll have to talk about that another day, but this is to be expected considering how much above normal or average the Indian Ocean has been in the year 2019. All right, here's a quick satellite shot of a good chunk of the Western Hemisphere. A couple things to point out to you. Pretty good steady trade winds blowing through the Caribbean, across the islands. Minor impacts from any disturbances that come through. They're mostly going to be dry. A little bit more of an active intertropical convergence zone over the slightly warmer water in the equatorial Pacific region. And then you see the southern stream of the jet moving across out of the subtropics here, across the Baja, the lower 48, down in the southern tier states. Energy trying to come into the west, maybe some energy diving out from Canada. It's getting close to wintertime, on the calendar anyway. December 20th, 21st is when it officially kicks in. But it's still stormy rather, nonetheless. But no major storms. We'll get onto that in the lower 48 part of this. But the main thing, really dry conditions down in the deep tropics here in the Atlantic side. If you're going to the Caribbean, you have a cruise planned. The recovery efforts in the Bahamas over here. From Dorian, that can continue without the threat of any organized tropical waves or other disturbances moving through, which is exactly what we would expect for December the 9th, right? All right. So here's one of the things that we will look at. I was hoping that this would update today, but the folks who's ever in charge at NOAA-NESDA Sea Surface Temperature Anomaly Map Sector didn't update it, at least not by the time I was recording this, which is 3:20, 3:25 p.m. Eastern. It's still stuck on December 5th, but that's all right. We will examine it next Monday, I guess. But this is one thing we will look at least once per week, and that is the sea surface temperature anomalies chart. And the anomaly, of course, means the departure from normal. And along the equatorial Pacific, this is one area that we will watch very closely. You see a couple of blobs of red, a few blobs of blue. By and large, a warm, neutral look to this signal here, what we call the ENSO signal, El Nino Southern Oscillation. Really want to keep an eye on this area through here over the next few months, because, yes, that will have a large influence on what happens to next year's hurricane season, but also what happens in the Atlantic. And right now, right here off the coast of Africa, down to the equator, water temperatures are quite a bit warmer than the long-term average. Everywhere else in the eastern Atlantic and the far east main development region, generally right at where it should be to slightly below average here off the northwest coast of Africa towards the Canary Islands and the Cabo Verde Islands too. So not very warm relative to average out here, warmer through the Caribbean, very warm in the northwest Atlantic, but it kind of doesn't matter too much this time of year. But this is something we can monitor, and the main thing that I will be watching, does this stay on the warm side of average, and does this become on the colder side of average? And if so, that could have a big influence on making next year's hurricane season quite busy. Some indications are from the long-range climate models, which can be terrible at their predictions, the models can. Generally speaking, it's looking like maybe we head into more of a La Nina pattern for next year. Neutral to La Nina, where we would see more of this blue start to show up. So we will have to see about that. One way that we can track that is through the subsurface anomalies. If this is the surface, this is what it looks like below. And they've changed the way they do this. I don't like it. It used to have a white background. Now it's all convoluted. And you really got to wait for the animation to stop, because it's hard to figure out what's what. The top is the surface here, and this is several hundred meters below the surface, 400 plus. This would be the eastern Pacific over here on the right side, the western Pacific over here on the left side. And this is kind of like a slice through the tropical Pacific. And this is all very warm water relative to average that you see all through here, dating back to late October. These blues that begin to show up, those are cold anomalies relative to average. And so the overall idea is from this, which is not a forecast. This is hindsight and a current analysis, current as in it takes a few days for it to catch up. But this is not a forecast. This is what's actually happening. And as you can see, it's kind of waxing and waning. There's quite a bit of orange and red in here, but then it starts to break up towards the end of the cycle. I thought this GIF animation would stop at some point, but maybe it's not. Then you got this very large area there. It finally stopped. It gets us listening to me. Large area of cold anomalies at the subsurface, but a pretty large area of warm. So it's going to seesaw back and forth. The key will be what this looks like April and May. Do we have a large area of warm anomalies setting up all across the subsurface Pacific by April and May, or a more cold look with this blue dominating? And there's no way to know for sure. There's all kinds of models and predictions, but we don't know for sure. So we will monitor this, and we can do so hopefully on a weekly basis. Another tool that we can look at are actual sea surface temperatures. These are not anomalies. This is your Gulf of Mexico chart of isotherms, or lines of equal temperature. And the one thing that should stick out, first of all, just looking at the legend, the scale here, anything yellow and to the right of that is 26 Celsius or warmer. So all of this that I'm outlining in blue is about 80 degrees Fahrenheit, 26 C, and warmer. Orange is 27, deeper orange is 28. So the Gulf is still quite warm here. A good third of it, maybe. It's kind of a stretch to say half, but a good third of it here definitely, warm enough to support tropical activity. So why don't we have hurricanes roaming around down here and in the Caribbean where it's still nice and warm? Well, a lot of that has to do with upper level winds, the available moisture, convergence in the atmosphere, the ability for air to come together and rise, that typically gets shut off. Those abilities and those positive parameters for development get shut off after November, and very much so. Strong westerly winds cut across. If we go back and look at the satellite animation, it's hard to see here, but I mean, there's just not a lot of moisture and energy down here. It's just void of that. And strong upper level winds cut across the region. It's just not favorable. So despite having warm water temperatures, that's not enough. You need more than that. And whatever that magical kick is, it definitely is lacking. So we'll watch this. The shelf water up near the United States, of course, colder. But we have not had any major Arctic intrusions. You figure at some point that'll happen, but it'll be really interesting to see how long does it take for this to cool down. It's never really a matter of the Gulf becoming warmer by some large factor than it should be, more so than the amount of energy that's down there, and it makes a difference with how quickly the hurricane season can get going when we talk hurricanes, but also in how we shape lower 48 weather, because more energy down here in the way of this warm water can fuel storms that try to get their start. They develop in the northwest Gulf and cut across and become stronger as they go up the east coast. So this is something to watch. And it'll matter if you're going down to the Keys, or you got spring break plans come March and April of next year. We shall see. On the Atlantic side, I really enjoy this. If you've watched my videos long enough, you know in the off season, I like looking at the temperature gradient, and you can really see that right there. Warm over in the Gulf Stream, much colder against the shelf waters there, the Pamlico Sound, and the waters off the coast of North and South Carolina, and then, of course, up here off of New England, very cold. But south of there, all this warm water, not only literally 24, 25, almost 26 Celsius, so we're talking mid to upper 70s Fahrenheit, contrasted with water temperatures that are in the single digits Celsius, and as winter progresses, that'll become single digits Fahrenheit as well. No, thank you. So we'll see when we get those storms that come off. Maybe the low comes off of the Delmarva and then tracks up like that. Those, what do they call that? The Miller B type pattern versus the Miller A when they more or less come up the coast like that. And that's all winter storm stuff. We'll get into that later when it's needed. But this is something we can watch as well. But you know what's interesting? You get in a boat off of Buxton down here, or Hatteras Village, or Ocracoke, which finally opened to residents, and you only go a few tens of miles, and whoop, you're in water that you could jump off the bow of the boat, and the water would be 79 to 80 degrees. That's amazing. It really is, especially when you get a cold shot that comes through, and you still have that warm water there that hasn't had time to dissipate. You could have a bow temperature on the bow of your boat of 45 degrees, and you could jump in to 80-degree water, and it's kind of like being in a hot tub. It's a stretch, I know, but it's that's amazing to me. It's oceanography, geography, weather, meteorology. It's all connected and really fascinating. Alrighty, so lower 48 weather, and sometimes it does cross over into the lower 48 weather part of the discussion. When you have a lot of warm water lurking offshore of a major continent, it does provide extra heat, extra sources of energy. Heat is energy. The moisture that's in that warm water can fuel storms. As far as the week ahead, well, at least right now today, the watch warning hazards map fairly tranquil, except for portions of the upper Midwest around Wisconsin, parts of eastern Iowa, northern Illinois, kind of stormy up there, and up there in the Gulf of Maine, which is right there. But other than that, a fairly benign pattern. There's going to be a storm system that's going to take shape, the front coming through the southeast. Maybe get some snow in portions of the deep south here up through the mid-Atlantic states. Maybe some ice. The usual winter folks that you follow on Twitter, keep following them. And, it's also very easy. You just go to weather.gov and look at this map and click anywhere on the map. For example, we click up here in East Central Virginia, and you get an idea of what's happening right now, a radar shot, and all kinds of information, including the forecast. If you were to click on, say, right here, what is that, Warrenton? Boom, you get a nice forecast And look, some snowflakes starting to show up, and you can read all about it yourself. And it's all very objective, and nobody's shouting at anybody on Twitter about posting snow maps. I saw that today. That it's the season of snow maps. They took that Daffy Duck and Bugs Bunny duck season, that's posted on a tree, and it said snow map season, because here you go. So one way to visualize winter weather, and I'm going to make this real easy, is to just look at the configuration of the jet stream, so to speak, the 500 millibar pattern. And this is the start of it, the initial map here from the Euro from today. And this is your United States, the lower 48. There's the East Coast, Florida and Texas, Mexico, Baja, California, Washington, Oregon, etc. And the neat thing about this is you can see it's generally a very broad trophy pattern here. You see that? It's a large bowl where the jet stream has dipped, a little lobe of it kind of breaking off in the desert southwest. So it's unsettled here, but nothing major. What we do not see a deep longitudinal trough coming down like that right now. And that's the key here, those deep, deep digging troughs. And that is the case over the next 10 days. We'll just kind of go through this. You see the waves of low pressure move through. There's they attempt at deepening these troughs, and there's a pretty sharp one there at about 8 days out. But it's transient, and you got a big ridge that pops up out over the west, and so it should quiet down out west when that happens. Day 9, day 10, day 9. Previous was day 8, a little maybe nor'easter here, whatever, but you don't see any big signals for major storminess in the Euro just yet. And finally, there's day 10. Ridging over the nation's midsection here, short wave over the east, short wave over the west. I say short wave, they're not long. They're not long wavelengths in the atmosphere. These deep longitudinal troughs. And, we're looking out 10 days, and we wouldn't really do that in the world of hurricanes, but in these signals, it's just good to see the pattern. And as you can see, the really low heights in the atmosphere, such as this up here, don't make it down into the lower 48. There's none of that polar vortex dipping a lobe down into the lower 48 anytime soon. So the storms will come and go. They'll be disruptive. And here's a good example. Here's Saturday morning, probably rain. It's not cold enough. See, there's no deep trough associated with that low there. It's too far back to the west. So probably a cold rain for New York City when Brent and I and a couple of my other colleagues meet up here in New York City and elsewhere. It's going to probably be like 42 degrees, windy and rainy. Yay, good for us. And then that moves on out. You see what I mean? There's just no big signal yet. So that's good in terms of commerce and travel, air travel, ground commerce, rail, whatever. It's important, and that's what we look at. Keep you hurricane prepared. That's the first job of mine, but also weather aware. The rest of the weather. We don't want to ignore the rest of the weather. All right, I dropped my first podcast episode, Stories from the Hurricane Highway, last Wednesday. Every Wednesday a new one will come out. This is exclusively on Patreon, and this is a benefit of becoming a patron. You support what we're doing. It's kind of like a cooperative crowdfunding. It's not a subscription, where you give me money and I give you stuff. That's not what it's like. It's not one way, where you pay a subscription and then you get to access maps and models. And that's very good for sites that do that. I don't have a problem with that, but that's just not what we're doing. It's interactive. It's two ways. The interactivity, the engagement, the ability for me to put information out there that's very helpful to people. And then some of those people, a couple hundred plus, are in the position to support this effort creatively, what I'm doing on Patreon. And that is a wonderful thing. And one of the benefits is this podcast. And that's every Wednesday between now and May, a new episode will drop. And it doesn't matter what level you sign up on, $1, $10, $25, doesn't matter. You get access to that podcast. So go to patreon.com/HurricaneTrack. Sign up today. We got a bunch of really interesting things coming on board. original content, new things for 2020 and beyond, and you can see the different posts that I'm able to make, and they're locked. If you just look at it from patreon.com/HurricaneTrack, that's what these are for. Unlock the posts and you get access. But yes, I do put the podcast on Patreon here. Chapter 1 has been loaded, whatever you want to call it, posted. And the next one, the first chapter went through the very beginnings of my career, and that's what the podcast is. It's not current events. It's stories from my career, from this metaphor we call the Hurricane Highway. And Chapter 2, which drops this Wednesday, 48 hours from now, will be about the year 1996. So that's the idea. We're going to go through chronological, history of what I've done and the people that I've met along this sometimes very tumultuous, metaphorical Hurricane Highway. So thanks to all the current patrons. The feedback from you has been awesome, and more is coming. The next episode this Wednesday, and then in January, the first episode of the new TV-type series, episodes, web series called The Hurricane Highway, which replaces Tracking the Hurricanes, the documentary. So we've got a lot going on, and it's because of our patrons that I have a lot going on. Do you see how that works? It's the old Jerry Maguire. You help me to help you to help me, or whatever it works, or however it goes, right? Remember that? Help me, help you. Help me. That's how it works. Crowdfunding is absolutely amazing. All right, that's it. Mondays will always be lengthy because we have a lot to talk about. As usual, I appreciate you tuning in. I hope you learned something from it. That's the bottom line. I want to teach you what I know, and that's the fun part of all of this. It really is. So thank you for tuning in from whatever device you happen to be doing so from. It's always good to have you there. I am Mark Sudduth, HurricaneTrack.com. I'll talk to you again next week.